Good morning, guys. All right, so let's get started. In this video, I'm going to teach you guys how we can create our own springtime nature landscape. And I think that my video just kind of glitched a little bit, so let me repeat that. We in this video are going to talk about what happens during spring. How does nature change and what kind of animals, come out during springtime? And then I'm going to teach you guys how to create kind of your own realistic springtime nature landscape with your own little springtime creatures. So the first thing that I want to do is introduce you guys to this book. It's called Springtime with Fletcher. And it's about this fox. Fletcher and the Springtime Blossoms is what it's called. And it's about this little fox who comes out of hibernation, and springtime is happening and all the trees and everything are blossoming, but it's still kind of cold. And it goes through just kind of like what happens during spring. What I want you guys to do while I play the book for you just on this video is to take notice of how you see nature changing during the spring. What you notice, like what happens during the springtime, like what kind of animals come out, how does nature's colors change, things like that. So just anything you can observe and notice and take note of that in your mind. And then we'll talk about it a little bit after the video. So first I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay.
Grammarly.
All right, we just got an ad here, so once I can skip that, I will skip it.
With Grammarly, you can find.
There we go.
Just burst buds of flower. Fletcher and the Springtime Blossoms by Julia Rawlinson. Pictures by Tiffany Beek. The woods were full of the chirping, bustling, sing-song sounds of spring. Fletcher bounced along with his nose in the air, sniffing the just-burst buds of flowers and playing chase with butterflies. With his head spinning with sights and sounds, he tumbled happily down the hill into the sunny orchard. But when he picked himself up from the ground, he couldn't believe his eyes. A soft breeze danced through the branches, carrying snowy flakes. Snow so late in spring, thought Fletcher. It will be too cold for the buds and butterflies. There's no time to lose. Looking for someone to tell, he trotted back up the hill and past a pair of birds coo-cooing on a branch. You've flown to your summer home too soon, Fletcher cried. I've been down to the orchard and there's more snow on the way. Then we should fly back south, they called. But first we must tell Porcupine. He's just come out of his bed of leaves. He needs to snuggle back down or he'll freeze. Fletcher and the birds found Porcupine stretching and scratching. There's snow on the way, panted Fletcher. I saw it in the orchard. It will be too cold for the butterflies, the birds will need to fly south, and you must hide away. Then I should crawl back into my bed, snuffled Porcupine sadly. But first we must tell Squirrel that he needs to hunt for food. He's eaten his winter store of nuts.
Okay, we're going to pause for a second to listen to the morning announcements.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Okay, let's pick back up. Finish the morning announcements. So let me get back to sharing my screen. Pick back up in the story. Hopefully we can finish it. Oh, no. Where were we? We were like right here.
Fletcher and the birds. There's snow on the way, panted Fletcher. I saw it in the orchard. It will be too cold for the butterflies. The birds will need to fly south, and you must hide away. Then I should crawl back into my bed, snuffled Porcupine sadly. But first we must tell Squirrel that he needs to hunt for food. He's eaten his winter store of nuts. He'll need to find some more. Fletcher, the birds, and Porcupine found squirrels scampering after sunbeams. Snow is blowing in from the orchard, gasped Fletcher. It would be too cold for the butterflies. The birds will need to fly south. Poor Porcupine must go back to bed, and you must find some food. You're right. I've eaten my spring feast, said Squirrel, and all my stores are gone. But before I hunt for more, we need to tell the rabbits to munch as much grass as they can before the snow falls. Fletcher, the birds, Porcupine and Squirrel hurried off again. The rabbits were rolling down the hill next to their burrow. Stop playing, cried Fletcher. There's snow blowing in from the orchard. It will be too cold for the butterflies. The birds will need to fly south. Poor Porcupine must go back to bed. Squirrel needs to find food, and you must munch more grass. Before we eat, said the rabbits, staggering dizzily to their feet. Let's go and play in the snow. So the rabbits hoppity-roly-poly plopped down the hill through the woods. They were chased by Squirrel, Porcupine, the birds, and a bouncy, full of importance fox all the way to the orchard, where the ground was white with blossoms. Blossoms bobbing in the branches, blossoms blowing in the breeze, blossoms blanketing the ground, and not a snowflake to be found. Those are blossoms, not snow, you foolish fox, the animals cried. Fletcher blinked and rubbed his eyes, feeling very silly. But then the animals scooped up paws and clawfuls of blossoms from the ground and covered him in a ticklish shower of fluttering white petals. Fletcher and his friends ran and played between the trees until at last they all collapsed in a blossomy, soft, white heap. Then the birds fluttered back to their branch with beakfuls of blossoms to line their nest. Porcupine snuffled off up the slope, his quills dotted with tiny white petals. squirrel went chasing up and down trees after snow-white petals dancing in the breeze. And the rabbits bounced back up the hill with blossoms to brighten their burrow. But Fletcher just lay smiling in his soft bed of petals, watching the blossoming branches bobbing overhead.
Okay, that was Fletcher and the Springtime Blossoms by Julia Rawlinson. So, what kind of changes did you see in the weather and nature and with the animals during spring in this book? You're probably thinking of all the flowers that are starting to bloom, how all the trees go from being bare to having tons of blossoms on them and leaves and flowers. You probably noticed how the animals come out of their homes and their dens and wherever else they have been hibernating. And they come out and they start to look for food and look for each other. Fletcher thought he saw snow and thought that, oh no, there's still some snow, even though it's springtime. I need to go tell the other animals not to come out. And what happens? Well, it's just the blossoms from the trees. Have you guys seen kind of the ground being covered recently? Looks like snow, but actually it's just a bunch of little flower petals. It's actually really pretty. What else comes with springtime when everything blossoms? What do you think? I have noticed that I get really sneezy, and that is because of pollen. Some of us have some allergies during springtime, and we react to the pollen in the flowers and the trees. So that's one thing too that you might notice. And yeah, you might start to see a lot of more animals, like more birds, rabbits. I haven't seen a fox yet, but maybe someone has. Squirrels, a lot of squirrels. So yeah, this is just a nice little book to show us and depict for us what springtime looks like. And what I'm going to show you is an art trick that people use to make landscapes look realistic. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, guys, so let's get started on our landscape. So I'm going to teach you a few things about making a landscape. And like we talked about, how weather changes and nature changes and animals now appear and come out of hibernation in the springtime. We're going to bring that to life in our own spring landscape. So I'm going to try and, make it similar to like the illustrations and pictures from the book we just read. First, what I want to go over though is a few certain things that are used in landscapes. And so this is kind of like the breakdown of what are in landscapes. And I want to tell you about them. So in a landscape, there are three different parts. There's the foreground, middle ground, and background. The foreground is the part of the ground that is closest to the whole thing that you're looking at. Closest to the part of the ground that's closest to the viewer. Things in the foreground are usually very big. That's why this tree here that is starting to grow in the foreground is a lot bigger than these other trees here because it's closer, right? And then the middle ground is the middle of the ground between the foreground and the background. And this part is the part of the ground that is just a little bit further away from the viewer, but still not the furthest part of the ground away from you. Things in here are just a little smaller than things in the foreground. Things in the background are always the smallest, and it's part of the ground that is in the back. It's furthest away from the viewer. And I remember it as the foreground is the front part of the page, or like the bottom part here. The middle ground is the middle of the page, and the background is the back part of the page, or closer to the back top part of the page. All right, and usually you can see like the sky too. Then there's a horizon line where the background ends because the ground starts to curve and you can't see it anymore. All three of these, foreground, middle ground, and background, to make our landscape look realistic, is demonstrated actually in that book we just read. And it's demonstrated really like through the trees and the hills. So here we can see in the landscape that we're trying to make how I have used different sized trees and different lengths to make them look like they're in the distance or closer. Same thing with the hill. So I'm going to show you guys some ways to do that. All right, so for the landscape and to make our foreground, middle ground, and background, we're going to make the ground, the sky, and the trees. So for that, you're going to need use about 2 sheets of white paper. So first sheet of white paper here is where we draw our middle ground, or foreground, middle ground, and background. I also have a big sheet of white paper or like a mat underneath so that as I use paint and everything and glue, it just gets on the mat and doesn't get tables really dirty. I also have crayons I'm going to use, watercolor paint with a brush and water, and then I have a little bit of black paint that I'm going to use for the trees and a piece of cardboard. All right. So first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to draw first with crayon and then I'll start painting. So I'm going to draw the different parts of the landscape. I'm going to draw a foreground. That is the hill or part of the ground that is closest and at the bottom of the page. And then the middle ground. I'm kind of making them kind of hilly. And then the background. Kind of goes that. So closest in the middle, furthest in the back. Got it? All right, so I did it with black crayon, but you're welcome to do it in pencil first and then do it in black. Now I'm going to use some different shades of green crayons to draw my grass. And your grass can be like this, and sorry, I'm shaking the camera. I'm trying to push down really hard. You guys should try too. So I'm doing it kind of like side to side, but you can make your grass like this. Keep in mind that whatever size, so your grass in the front here is going to be bigger, while your grass in the back is going to be smaller because it's further away. And in the middle, it's kind of between the two. Okay. So, that. You can fill in the grass however you want to fill in the grass. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to add some spring flowers, things like that. The ones that are in the foreground will make bigger. And the ones in the back small. In the book, there are a lot of those like blossom petals that fall that are white and look like snow. So I'm going to use a white crayon and try and cover some of the ground with those petals. You can't see it yet, but you'll be able to see it once I again use any materials that you have available to you to make it. It doesn't have to be the exact same material. In the book, there's like a bluebird, some bluebirds, kind of like a banana shape. So I'm gonna do that. All right, so now it's time to paint. And this painting method is called wax resist because of the waxy crayons that we just used is going to resist the water paint, the watercolor. All right, I want to go ahead and paint around in the grass. And you can see how the waxy crayon isn't mixing with the watercolor because the wax stays on top of the paper while not my camera, sorry. While the paper absorbs the watercolor paint underneath. flowers and the bird and the grass texture I did. Make sure you wash your brush off between colors. Sky. See how now, it's a good thing I have this big piece of paper underneath because I'm going off the edges to cover the whole thing. Okay, I'm gonna set that aside. Keep knocking, sorry. I'm gonna set this aside now to dry. Oh, I can see like my little blossom petals, all the white there. Cool. And as it dries, I'm probably gonna notice that, oh, I wanna do another coat to make it darker, and that's up to you. Now I'm gonna get my next sheet of white paper, and this is the paper that we're gonna use to make our tree. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut some white strips out of it that are different sizes, like thick and thin, and as well as tall and short. All right, so first I'm going to cut some thick ones that are the whole height or width of the paper here. It doesn't have to be totally straight, doesn't matter. Trees are not. But these are the trees that will be in the foreground. And they are thicker because they're closer, so they're actually bigger. All right, now the ones that will be in the middle ground will be somewhat thinner, not as thick. I'm gonna cut a couple of those. I might use them, both of them, I might not. I am gonna go ahead and get my picture here, and I'm gonna put them in the middle ground, and then figure out how much I need to cut off the top here so that it's not sticking off the paper. Okay, good. That's fine. And yeah, it's getting kind of wet. Okay, cut shorter so that it fits within the paper. All right, and now let's make some really thin ones for the background. And same thing again, we are going to start it in the background here and then cut off all the excess from the top of the paper because we want to fit from the background from the top of the paper. I might be able to just use the excess of what I cut to do the other one. Good. All right, so now I've got a few for each part of the ground. Okay, all right, I'm going to set aside again the one I painted. Now I'm going to put my white strips on my mat here in a row that I want. Okay, and now I'm going to get that black paint. I had a little bit of it. This is tempera paint, so it's a little bit thinner than like acrylic paint, but whatever black paint you have at home to use is fine. Watercolor is not going to be as easy to use though, so either tempera or acrylic paint would work. If you don't have paint, then I suggest using a black crayon and just using the side of the crayon to do like a rubbing of those marks that you'll see. All right, so I'm going to use some of the paint that I got on the hard edge of the cardboard there. And on the strip here, do what's called a scrape method. Okay, I'm using the flat side of one of the edges of my little piece of cardboard. I just got this piece of cardboard from a box I have. I'm just going to scrape some of the bark texture onto my trees. And I'm not going to make it all black because we want to still see some of the white and get the texture. Okay, I'll do that to all of them. Just alternate between scraping and anything. Doesn't really matter. No rhyme or there's no correct way to scrape it. Just start scraping. It's really fun. Okay, and try and cover all that I can. The little ones are really easy to cover because they're so small. Oops, that one, big one. Okay, and that was actually really quick. Okay, and they're kind of hard to see because my paper underneath has a lot, but I'm gonna go ahead and Now I'm going to arrange them the way I want them to be on the paper in the foreground, middle ground, and background. And some of them can even be kind of like growing sideways. I think that makes it look really more realistic because some trees are kind of bendy or angled like that. And I have them in the places I want them arranged the way I want. I'm going to get my glue stick, pop off and twist it up a little bit. I'm going to lay the strip, my tree strip down, facing down on my mat so that I can add glue all to the back here to make it sticky. And glue it in their proper places in the foreground, middle ground, and background. It's okay if you glue it, you realize that some of it's going off the paper. You can cut off the excess after it dries. If your paper's still wet from watercolor, then you probably gotta wait for it to dry before you can move on to gluing and everything. Or, I mean, I'm getting paint all over my fingers, so I don't really care if I work while it's still wet. All right, there we go. So now we have our trees that look really realistic because they're technically all the same sizes, but the ones that are closest to us are bigger and the ones that are in the background are further away. And so next week what we'll do, we'll be able to add more details. We'll be able to do kind of like our little forest creatures like we saw in the book. We can add more branches to our trees with little strips of paper and our scraper kind of method. And I would even, after I do all this, is go back to the trees and I would put with paint or maybe crayons, I would kind of do like blossoms off the branches of my tree just to make it look like the trees are blooming and they're not bare anymore and it's not winter. All right, well, that's it for today. Can't wait to see what these look like, so send me a picture and hope you guys have a great rest of your week.